Welcome to the Slow Money Club podcast, the show giving you realistic ways of attaining financial freedom. We share get-rich-slow strategies to help you go from employee to entrepreneur and turn your dreams into income streams. Now here's your host.
Hello.
Kwesi.
Thank you for joining me again here on the Slow Money podcast. I am delighted again to be joined by another great entrepreneur. This time I've got Diksesh Patel with me. Now, Diksesh is a living example of what slow money is all about, really. He has made that transition from being a corporate employee to being a full-time entrepreneur quite recently. So his story will resonate with a lot of people going through that journey right now, whether you're at the beginning, middle, or end. So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce you to Diksesh. Hi, Diksesh.
Hi, Kwesi. Good to talk to you today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I know Diksesh pretty well. We met at a property networking event randomly, but it just so happens that he also lives near me. So we catch up for coffee quite often, and I've got to know him and got to learn a lot from him. He, like me, started his career in the city. And I think for the purposes of this interview, Diksesh, why don't you tell us a little bit about the beginning part of your career, what you started doing and how you got into the city?
Yeah, sure. So I think my career really sort of blocks up into three real distinct chunks. So the first part is I graduated from LSE, which I'm very proud of, the first in my family to graduate of any London university. So I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations to your mum.
Thank you. I actually grew up in a council estate in Willesden. That was quite a character building exercise for a young Indian family, especially in a neighbourhood where, there's a lot of strange people walking around. And I remember the time, and I can't really say I enjoyed it, but it did turn me into quite a tough person, streetwise, street capable.
Yep.
The first time that I remember applying for my university application, and I put down the top 4 or 5 universities, and I actually put LSE in there. My teacher at the time said, Diksesh, there's no point you applying there. You're never going to get in there. Now, he could have done that to send a motivational trigger to me, but hell, I was going to prove that wrong and actually do it for myself. And I did. Following on from that, I took my first sort of trainee job down in a little place called Wallington as a junior programmer, where I spent a few years learning my trade, starting off in mainframe systems, moving all the way through to Microsoft solutions. And during that initial phase, there were a number of roles which I sort of transitioned into different non-banking type sector roles and stumbled across some contacts in the banking fraternity. And so actually my first role in investment banking was with, back in those days, called Abbey National Treasury, which has now transitioned into Santander, as we know. And, that was my first junior banking role. And I spent 6 years transitioning through various divisions, front office IT, market risk, credit risk IT. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed that. However, as with most things in life, you reach an epiphanistic moment and actually think, you want more than this. So I actually took my first sort of entrepreneurial step, having been at Abbey National for a chunk of time, 6 to 7 years, and decided that I would take a redundancy, at which point I did. So from the years from, pretty much from 2004 all the way through around 2008, while still working, dipping in and out of the banking sector, I started off in my entrepreneurial journey, first and foremost in a distribution e-commerce business. Now, that actually went south around the post-Lehman era. To cut a long story short, the economy went the wrong way, and it was a character building exercise. And I'm open about this. That probably cost well in excess of £500,000. It was a massive learning experience. How not to run a business was the great thing. Quickly learn about sales, marketing, finance, operational risk, and completely learn about even how to be a customer services person when your staff are on holiday.
So that's interesting, just bringing us up to date there. So you started out in technology, and I guess at LSE, what did you study?
I actually studied computer science.
And then you were working in technology for a period, and you chose redundancy as an opportunity to pursue your entrepreneurial endeavors. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of people, when they hear redundancy or see redundancy, fear it. But what I like there is that, you took the bull by the horns, as they say, and you saw that as an opportunity as opposed to something to be afraid of.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned that, the first venture that you engaged in when the credit crisis hit and the global financial crisis hit didn't go so well. What were the things for any entrepreneur coming into the game right now in the e-commerce sector? What would you advise and what did you learn in that period?
So I learned a hell of a lot. One of the things that I did realize is that it's okay to ask for help from other subject matter experts. Number two was it's okay to have subject matter experts come into your business in some way, shape or form, whether it's a partnership type model or whether it's a non-executive director type model. Because when you're starting off on your entrepreneurial journey, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it's quite easy to go hell bent for leather and say, yep, I'm going to conquer the world. And the reality of it is you yourself as an entrepreneur have a lot to learn about business. So I would definitely bring in the right level of expertise at various stages of the business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people are afraid to kind of bring in outside help or to put their hand up and say, I need help, especially when they're an entrepreneur. It's kind of the entrepreneur's curse, really.
Absolutely.
And so you then went on to start this business. It didn't work well. What did you do next?
So that's a good question. I actually went back into the investment banking arena. And it's an interesting turn of events the second time round. So been through a business with real money, dealing with real lives, and a costly learning experience. When I went back in almost in a similar role as an analyst programmer. Now, it's interesting, the second time round I went back in, my perspectives in the corporate world actually changed pretty much overnight. Cut a long story short, I went back as a freelancer, which I quite enjoyed, being in control. So I actually turned myself into a business, almost acting like a consultant. What value can I add to the business? If we're being asked to do a project, what's the cost benefit to the business? Is there a value proposition here? Are there other things that we can do to improve on the activities or the projects that we're being asked to drive forward? And actually, in a very short space of time, second time round, I actually started rising up and taking on more responsibilities. So, the old adage of the only person who's going to promote you is you. Well, take the responsibilities on. And actually, I was quite successful working for a Japanese investment bank the second time round over a 6 to 7 year period, and ended up being head of product and finance control IT. And for a freelancer, that's probably unheard of.
That sounds quite good.
And that all stems back from my business experiences.
Yeah. So you took you worked as an employee for a period. You didn't necessarily like it and you took the opportunity to go freelance after your business didn't work. But then actually, I guess all your learnings from those experiences help accelerate your career when you were back as an employee.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And the thing that it didn't stop me, I should say, is my imagination and mindset was always around, looking at an opportunity in an entrepreneurial capacity. Yeah, so at which time around the sort of 2009, 2010 mark, I actually embarked on my first technology startup.
Oh, wow.
And that, again, I'm very proud of. We raised £80,000 of private finance. Whilst the social media platform didn't gain any traction, we learned our first stages of ring fencing a business around an SEIS tax efficient manner, as well as tax efficiencies around EIS. And, the investor's downside risk was limited to around 20-25%. So again, great learning experience. And it's certainly an area that I'm very passionate about going forward. And I will at some point, when we move on to prop tech in the coming years, it's an area that I'm certainly looking to get back into.
Yeah, that's all very interesting, the prop tech sector. Just coming back to the employee side, when you went back into working full time, I guess having worked for yourself for a period must have been a hard transition, readjusting back to having a boss telling you what to do full time, etc. How was that like?
Very tough in the first couple of years, because a lot of the times when you go back in, believe it or not, you actually probably have more experience than the people who you're actually working for. And that's no disrespect to them. It's just the way the land lies, right? I have more commercial experience. What I actually did proceed to do, and what I did learn from being an entrepreneur, the best policy is actually just find a way of helping people in your upline management, find out what their problems are, what can you do to add value, and what can you do to maybe help them in even their corporate ladder, because that's what they want to do. And if they push up, naturally the only thing that's going to happen is for you to push along with them.
Yeah.
So I did start to push up above quite in a positive way to help other people.
So look up and try to see what you can do to help the people above you, and hopefully they'll pull you up.
Yes.
I like that. And so you said you then, while you were working there, you were working also on this tech startup. Were you doing those at the same time?
Yeah, pretty much. So what I learned the first time when I sort of dipped my toe in the water in the entrepreneurial journey is to look to build something sustainable whilst working. So, a lot of my evenings and weekends would have been chunked looking to build this platform. And for me, it's about creating something that's sustainable, repeatable, and actually allows you to generate an income that can supplement what you currently do. And then when the time is right, move along and actually do that full time. That was the idea.
Yeah, which sounds like a smart idea. I think there are a lot of course providers, for example, who sell this idea. You can quit your job today and, be making income from property, for example, or Bitcoin or whatever it might be in the next few weeks that will supplement your income. But I don't think you subscribe to that idea.
No. Well, I think, there's a lot of people selling dreams and whatnot. And believe it or not, for the third time I departed the corporate world last year, and it is a slow money business being in the entrepreneurial world, especially with life's lessons. And there is no such thing as a quick, easy street to £1 million. I know firsthand, having tried it many times over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. And so then you were working with this tech startup, raising money from private individuals. Tell me a bit about that process. I think one of the things that many entrepreneurs, especially those who are also employees, struggle with is the whole fundraising and capital raising aspect, if they have full-time jobs, etc. So tell me a bit about that period when you were raising funding for your venture.
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, to take a step back, what I started to do was hang around in the tech startup scene. So started to sort of go to a lot of meetups around technology startup, living and breathing with what technologies we're up to. I spent a bit of time up in Google's Silicon Valley as well, up in Shoreditch, which is great fun. I've still made a lot of good friends and contacts out of that as well. And just understanding what they were doing, well, we've got this business problem. Where do we want to raise money? And to cut a long story short, what it stemmed down to is having your idea, having a vision, and being able to put that across to people when you're out on the road. And a lot of it comes down to the relationships and the bonds that you build and how much confidence people will generate in you as a person. So I think the person itself is what sells and cements the relationship. And then what you find is the actual funding becomes a lot easier to ask for later on down the track, because it's too easy sometimes to get caught up in transaction.
So what should the focus be on?
For me, the focus should be on building relationships, adding value in areas. So, I'm currently in the property world, but back then in the technology world, if I'm meeting other tech entrepreneurs, it's what can I add value? Is there anybody else I can put you in touch with? And then once you're in that mindset and you're in that fraternity, people are always, helpful. Like for us, you and I, we have great conversations and there's always something to learn.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm learning a lot right now just speaking with you. So, I think what I like about what you just said, meeting people, networking with people, building those relationships, as opposed to focusing on the money, and almost making the money secondary to the idea and to the concept of actually helping people. And that's something that resonates very much with me, because I think too many people are focused primarily on money. And the whole concept of slow money is that money is a byproduct of helping people ultimately. And the more people you help, the more money you'll make.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about then that transition from your most recent transition from your career into full-time entrepreneurship. What made you decide, and what steps did you put in place when you decided that this was a transition you wanted to make again, having already done that in the past?
Yeah, so from the first few businesses that I ran, I learned a hell of a lot around what my ideal business looked like. So let's look at some of the problem statements. Having a business that has a huge operational schedule, which means you need lots of staff. And one of the things I quickly realized that I really wanted a very, very thin business. And I spent a lot of time in my own mind trying to figure out which would be the thinnest business that I could work on, where people were ring-fenced on a contractual basis that would allow me to control the growth. So we come to property. Property is one of the most optimized businesses that I know of, where every party that you're working with, whether it's a planning consultant, an architect, a main contractor, a quantity surveyor, building control, whoever it is, these are all ring-fenced, outsourced and systemized through watertight contracts. And I love that. And the reason I love that is because if you hit a challenge with any party, you can easily move on and find somebody new or better. Second of all, as your business grows, you will also have to grow the people that are in your power team. The property development world allows you to do that. And that's massive for me. I've got a very thin business, and it allowed me to actually operate the business whilst still working in my freelance role. And I spent a good 3 years establishing the business before I pulled the trigger for which I would hope is the last and final time from the corporate world.
3 years, that's a really long time. And in a good way. I think a lot of people have a short-term mindset and will probably be looking at 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year. But you think that 3 years, do you think that was too long? Do you think you could have done it sooner?
I think, I definitely could have done it a lot sooner. And again, even in that 3 years, I've learned a hell of a lot. So if I had to go back in time 3 years from now, what would I advise myself or anybody new starting up is it's all too easy to get caught up in, especially in property development, to think that you can do it all yourself. Similar to the first time I got into the entrepreneurial world. Don't be afraid to find collaborative partners that can help accelerate your journey. So, taking property development example, there are really three key facets. You've got the development, the site, the deal, for want of a better term. You've got the funding that you need to accelerate that deal and turn it into a money engine. And thirdly, you've got the delivery capability. Now, my recommendation is to focus on one of those three in the early years and look to bring in or partner with somebody who can bring in two out of those other three facets. And that will more likely to accelerate your growth curve. So my 3 years could potentially have been condensed down to possibly 18 to 24 months, not any sooner, had I pivoted towards bringing on more collaborative partners rather than thinking I had to do every single facet of that business myself.
Yeah, and that's a good lesson to learn. So the more you partner, the quicker you can make that transition. But you should still be thinking in terms of years as opposed to months.
Yes, this is a slow money business. Most development projects are anywhere from 12 to 24 months. By the time things turn around, you've got a real slow curve along.
And so once you decided that you were going to make that change or that transition again, what steps did you put in place?
So what I've done is, in the early part, as the business was growing, we were quite tight with our budgeting, because what we're doing is we're creating a cash flow or working capital to allow us to transition into this full-time business. Coupled with this, in parallel, my IT consultancy roles were building up a nice little cash flow pot as well. And what I then decided was I needed to create enough of in entrepreneurial parlance, a runway of keeping your lights on, which is what I proceeded to do. And that's when I actually felt comfortable. And even this time around, it wasn't an easy decision. I probably procrastinated for 6 months. And then eventually the business started taking up a huge amount of my time, especially in the early part of 2017. And I felt, you know what, if people are going to take me seriously in this business, whether that's investors, banks who are lending us money, or even estate agents or commercial partners who are looking to find us sites, they're not, are they going to take me seriously? And actually, since I did transition back into full-time entrepreneurship, I've probably achieved more in the last 8 to 9 months than I did in the prior 3 years whilst working in parallel. However, you still have to feel some of that pain to try and build yourself a good working capital pot to allow you to feel, slightly comfortable around times when your property projects are still running and the money still hasn't come in.
Yeah, so you talked a bit about Runway. What does that look like in terms of, are you thinking a specific number in mind? How many, or months?
I would say, if you start creating a runway of 5 years, from a financial perspective, that seems ridiculous, because you'll have a lot of money sitting around, not working hard for you. So for me, around the 18 to 24 month mark is a reasonable runway. That should give you enough time, especially if you look to try and sort of collaborate with other partners, to potentially get 1 or 2 development projects or property projects off the ground, by which time, by the time the 18 to 24 month window comes around, you should have 1 or 2 projects should have finished by then.
Okay. So what you're saying is basically have about 18 to 24 months worth of personal capital to pay your bills, keep the lights on, etc., before you kind of make that leap, just to give you a bit of a runway, a bit of a buffer.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And also the other tip would be is remember that because you're an entrepreneur, you're still borrowing bank financing to facilitate your projects, is to make sure that you have working capital in your company such that you're actually drawing an income from a tax perspective, because you still need to show a minimum income for lending purposes. That's hugely important.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget. If you need to borrow money, you need to meet the lending criteria of the person that's going to lend you money. And in the case of property, you need to be able to borrow from the bank, who often ask for income, and sometimes even non-property related income. So that's all things to bear in mind before you quit your job.
Indeed.
And so you made that transition, you went into property entrepreneurship full time, and you're focused in the property sector doing developments. I guess the next thing I really want to draw down into is understanding a bit more about how that works. What does that look like? So what does a typical day of a property investor doing developments actually look like?
A good question. It's unlike a corporate role. I don't believe that any one day is the same. When I first sort of quit back at last April, it took me about 2 or 3 months just to figure out my timetable, as it were. I loosely split up my timetable into a number of chunks. One is I spend a lot of time building relationships with potential investors. Number 2 is we have a number of parties in the professional property world, such as planning consultants, architects, also main contractors, construction companies, which we're also looking to partner up in the given future, where we're looking to build relationships. I take a slight digression there, especially with planning consultants and architects. Some of these people are also very good at helping you find sites. So again, focusing on that deal deal flow channel. And the third part is actually focusing on directly around our development site sourcing channels, which is contacts and conversations and meetings with commercial agents, deal sourcing partners, land sourcing partners, and adding more deals into that flow. And of course, the last part, which is the bit that I don't really enjoy, is your operational and admin type activity to make sure that any relationships or contacts that you're building, we have a CRM now, which we track quite actively, so that when you start collating and collecting valuable data, for example, we have a lot of valuable data from 2017, we can look back at that and say, actually, what numbers came in through from our investor channels, what numbers came through in our deal flow channels, such that we can see what positive results came out of it and any areas that we can tweak in our KPIs.
So you talked about you have a CRM. What's a CRM?
CRM, customer relationship management, contact relationship management, basically a simple database that allows you to collect all your contacts in any shape or form, whether it's planning consultants, builders, estate agents, investors, that just allow you to make sure that you're keeping it housed. In simple terms, if you're starting new, just use an Excel spreadsheet until you reach a certain tipping point. For me, a CRM allows you to be a lot more organized, alerts on follow-ups. You can see the history and the tracking of how that relationship has moved forward in, say, 6 to 12 months. For example, if we're tracking a deal, you might find that it takes you, 9 to 12 months to close it, but you still need some form of tracking.
Yeah. So it's a client relationship tool basically for tracking deals and managing the relationships offline. That's interesting. And which one do you use? Which CRM?
We use Podio at the moment. However, I am looking at potentially trialing another piece of kit called Pipedrive. But I'll keep you posted. We're still got to get through a demo. That looks slightly more dynamic than Podio. Podio's given us a good platform. Now I believe we need to take it to a different level such that our tracking is a lot more efficient.
Podio, do you pay to use that?
Yes, I don't. It's not that. I mean, you're talking like tens of 20s or £30 a month, depending on which license you go for.
Okay, and I think there's a free version.
There is an entry level one for new entrepreneurs where there is no cost as well. So it's pretty flexible.
So when I first started in property, the two things that I think every property person struggles with is, number one, finding good deals, and number two, funding those deals. So I want to drill down into a bit around finding good deals, and in particular, the type of due diligence that an investor should do when they're looking for good deals. And I know that you're more focused on developments as opposed to buy and hold investments, as we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So if you could just tell us a bit more about that segment of the business, i.e. developments, and then a bit about finding good deals, or what does a good deal actually look like?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of developments, I'll probably just quickly summarize what we're doing at the moment. We've got 3 in-flight developments. We've got a 33-house unit land deal going through planning as we speak. It's expected the planning to come through around April or May, so that's hugely positive. We've got another project which is due to start groundworks in February in London, 7 flats and a commercial. And then finally, we also have 45 studio conversion up in central Peterborough. Those works are due to be completed at the back end of this year. And that's all as a pipeline of the prior 2 to 3 years. Now, in terms of finding good deals, there is actually a journey behind that. I think one thing is we all need to know how to appraise a deal. Finding deals, there are plenty of channels around commercial agents, estate agents, land sources. First thing is, do you know how to appraise a deal? And one of the things I actually learned was when we first started appraising deals at a very basic level, the best thing you can do actually is send a couple of your sites to 1 or 2 of your brokers, and be aware that their time is also valuable, and actually gain some feedback from the lender and their underwriter. And then you soon quickly get to an assessment of how they appraise a deal. And how nice of them, because a lot of those financial modeling feedback that we got back from some of those actually merged into the way we appraise and analyze deals, because we had to look at it from the bank's perspective. How can we package it up in such a way that they will actually lend me the senior debt or the mortgage, if you want to call it that, on a project, that then suggests what's the best price to pay to make this project hugely profitable. So I definitely think that's one way of increasing your deal appraisal capability. The other way is also you'll have a lot of site finders, deal sources, developers as well. Get out there and start talking to a lot more experienced developers. There are a lot of them out there who are quite happy to share their knowledge around the analysis of the deal. And again, I've learned a hell of a lot from experienced developers as well. And I'm able to sort of fine tune that and bring that into our own deal appraisal system.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you have a deal, what's the first thing that you look at?
As a basic level, there are only really three things I look at. With most development sites, what we have to do is at the start, they're all apples, oranges and pears. The question is, how do we chunk them down to make sure that they're all apples? So in simplistic terms, you really want to be looking at three key numbers just to give yourself a quick margin calculation. Look at everything in either price per square foot or price per square meter, but let's take price per square foot. What are you paying for a site on a price per square foot basis? What do you assess on a price per square foot that your site will sell out at? And then more importantly, what do you assess on a price per square foot for your build costs? Now, if you do the maths, A minus B minus C, you'll have a margin that appears. And I'll use an example from today, actually. An 18-site deal, which we were looking at, its end value, 1.8 million. Its site acquisition costs of £450,000. Now, just because of the way I've assessed deals and numbers in the past, I didn't really need a calculator to work out that deal didn't stack up. In simplistic terms, the build costs, even if I assessed it £150 a square foot, the sellout cost at the other end was not much more than £200 a square foot. Therefore, put your pen down and move on to the next deal. So in simplistic terms, your price per square foot against three key variables: what you're paying, what your build cost is, and what you're selling for. That means that you should be able to then analyze a lot more deals and then chunk it down to getting to a more detailed level underneath that.
And so then when you do that equation, what margin is actually a good margin? How do you know if it's good?
Yeah, so we have to be careful in terms of the terminology. So I think there are a couple of things that not only I look for, but also investors look for. Gross profit margin. So in simplistic terms, how much is it going to cost you on buying, building, selling out at the other end? Your total costs, everything, including your funding costs. What magic number do you come up with? Let's assume £1 million in this case. And if your end value is 1.3 million, your gross profit margin in that example is 300,000 divided by 1.3. And in this case, it's 23%. So your gross profit margin is a key indicator. I look at, if it's a site with planning, 20% and above, as well as do most investors.
So why 20%?
Why 20%? So in any project, there are so many moving parts. So you could get delays in your build. Your main contractor could go bust. If that happens, your time goes up, which means your funding costs are going to increase. Also, you've got other economic factors such as Brexit, market conditions that you cannot control. For me, it's about having a cushion, and in the worst eventuality, if the market drops by 10-15% or something goes wrong in your project, you've got enough of a buffer to be able to come out the other side still swimming.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so with the deal that you were just talking about, you said the acquisition costs were over 400K. And so for somebody, let's say somebody starting out at the beginning of their career, how would they get access to 400K plus to acquire such a site?
There are two ways to answer that. A, how I currently do that, and B, if you're a newbie, how I would go about doing it. So let's take it in terms of how I currently do that. So first thing to do in any business is you have your deal flow activity and your investor flow activity. And John Corey was actually one who really put us on a good path just over 15 months ago on this. Totally dislocate your deal flow activity from your investor flow activity. What the inference behind that is refine and retune your deal flow activity and continue to go and find good deals and park them up on your bus. On right field, you improve your investor flow activity, and typically what happens is most investors don't buy you on transaction alone. It's they buy people. Using your deals that you come through as case studies. And typically what we're finding is most investors will come on board after they've seen the third or fourth of your case studies. And that's key. Nobody's ever going to drop a penny just because you found that first deal and, hey, presto, off you go. Investors are quite savvy and they do take their time. And quite rightly, they should take their time to understand how you as a developer appraise those deals.
And so then what about for a newbie?
So for a newbie, let's look at some of the problem statements. So a newbie without a track record is unlikely to get any lending on a site of that nature. Investors unlikely to have any confidence. So where do they begin? I draw it back to the three key facets of a business. You've got the deal, you've got the delivery capability, you've got the funds. There's no reason why new people, if they spent time building relationships with more experienced developers, pointing case like us, where they can work with them to find possibly a site, possibly an investor, where you're actually leveraging the credibility of some more experienced partner, and not to worry about what you're going to get from the proposition, more to just to get the deal done. Because once you've got your name on that, you'll be able to use that as a credibility push for ensuing conversations with other investors. And that's key. And that's definitely something I recommend. It's too easy to get caught in. I found this deal. I need 400,000 and expect somebody's going to drop something out of the sky. A much better solution, given that we're in the Slow Money Club, is to take your time, possibly partner up with an experienced developer who has the track record and be able to leverage their credibility, because conversations with investors thereafter will become a lot more easier. And then possibly in years 2 or 3, look to work on your own projects that are self-funded through other investors.
Yeah, that's a good feedback. I think one of the things that a lot of people do is they find it what they think is a good deal, and they feel like they have to execute that deal. And they don't want to bring other people into the deal because they feel they're giving away equity. And we all know how expensive equity is. So they will they'll either try and keep the deal for themselves and therefore not be able to execute on the deal, or they will just not be able to execute and let the deal go. But what you're saying is that focus on the components that you can actually deliver on, and then bring in other people to do the rest. And don't worry too much about the money. Focus on getting the experience that in future will bring in that money and will bring in those investors.
That first project, once you get that done in any shape or form, don't worry about what's in it for you, because you can use that as a marketing tool for especially a credibility push with future investors, and you will far accelerate your business doing it that way.
Yeah, I like that. I like that sentiment, and I like that mindset approach. So I want to just shift focus slightly, and I want to talk more about, from an investor perspective, for experienced investors trying to accelerate their development process. I mean, you've spent a decent amount of time now in that industry. What do you see as the key things that people need to do in order to be able to accelerate their property development business from a startup phase more to a growth phase?
I think, I'll give you an example of what I'm doing to accelerate my business. I will continue to partner up with more experienced developers. Now, it doesn't really matter which part of the experiential journey you're at. You should always look to be punching above your weight. And the only way you can do that is to be able to work on bigger projects where you may not have the right experience. So for anybody starting off new, if you go it alone and feel you have to do the delivery, the deal, and the investors, for me, that's quite hard work. It's much faster to work in a collaborative way and bring in relationships and potential future business partners, which is where I met my first business partner in a networking event 3 or 4 years ago, because you cannot do this business on your own. It is quite a time-hungry business.
Going back to the other scale of the curve, when people are working full-time as employees and trying to move to entrepreneur, property in itself is very time-consuming as well as very capital-intensive. So looking at that side now, what would you advise anybody who wants to get into property development and is currently working full-time in a corporate world but wants to make that transition? How should they be thinking of it and how should they be approaching it?
The first thing is your time and your schedule. What I used to do was I had a 7-day window, and anywhere where there are windows of opportunity in terms of time, for example, your lunch hours, for example, evening site viewings, Saturday mornings for phone calls and other site viewings, be efficient with your timetable, because what you'll find is that you will be more successful if you leverage your time, especially where you have a tight schedule with your work involved. That's number one. Secondly, I would say that for a short period of time, and I'm talking a couple of years, potentially consider leveraging some of your annual leave on your business activities and maybe forego that little holiday to the Maldives or somewhere. Because if you're really serious about this, it's about leveraging every single time that you have that's non-working related to be able to help grow your business. And that, for me, is key. And eventually what you'll find is that it actually does become fun. You don't even think about it.
Yeah, I know that it becomes fun. But one of the things people often say to me is that they're working full time. I know, like you, they have a family, have children, want to spend time with their kids, want to dedicate and support their partner. So, and then on the weekend, they want to have some downtime for themselves and, unwind before the week starts again. And what I guess for you did that. You've been through that transition. You were working full time. You had a family as well as your business ventures on the side as you were trying to make that transition. So somebody going through that right now and having those same thoughts, what would you advise them? And how did you cope? How did you deal and manage? How did you stop your wife from running off?
I was maybe more lucky than most, where my wife spent a significant amount of her time with the children since the day they were born. So, not all families are able to do that. What I found was that ultimately, for a period of time, whilst you're trying to build your business, there will be sacrifices. I don't think there's a right balance. There never will be. But what I would say is that as you come out into full-time entrepreneurship, the reward is this. I spend a lot more time when I see the kids in the morning, whereas before I might have been in the office. I love going up to watch Liverpool play up at Anfield with my younger lad. So what you find is that you might have to, and it's inevitable, make a sacrifice in your time, but balance it in such a way that you spend the time where you have to, where you want to with your family. And Sundays, typically, most businesses shut down anyway. You're not going to be doing a huge amount of activity. That's a great time. And also, I used to spend a lot of time on Friday evenings and Saturday evenings with family, which, to be honest, in all honesty, was not too different from when I used to work in the corporate world.
So what you're saying is that you can find the time, basically. You just need to prioritize and manage it.
Yeah, and it's also about your motivating drivers, right? For me, the time will come later to have much more, you want more, you never get enough time with your family. And that's what I've learned. But what I do is when I do spend time, I want that to be quality rather than quantity.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to start winding down this interview. But before I let you go, Diksesh, I want to just pick your brain and ask you some questions, some quick fire questions that I'll throw at you. So what was the hardest thing you found being an employee?
For me, it's about your growth. When you're in an employment domain, there's always somebody there, your manager, your line manager, it could be your cost center owner. The system really, for me, was never designed to allow employees to grow beyond the sphere of the roles that they were working on. I heard it all the time. Who asked you to do that? That wasn't part of your role. And that's not really conducive to building successful and sustainable corporate models, in my view. Because you see a lot of people walking around being, I wouldn't like to use the word miserable, but being unhappy in what they're doing. And a lot of it is because they're not allowed to physically grow. So I think the corporate world needs to look at that and create much more happier mediums that allow employees to do things that potentially might not benefit the corporate environment directly, but you bet your bottom dollar you've got somebody who's hugely motivated.
Yep. I couldn't agree with you more, to be honest. Second question. What's the hardest thing you found since you've been an entrepreneur?
Hardest thing is the unknown and the predictability of it. And what I mean by that is development is, it's a very spiky cash flow business. And it's just a case of having belief and confidence that you will get through that and your rewards will come through later. Because we all have our ups and downs. I'm sure you do. We've spoken about this before. I do as well. And there have been countless times where I thought, oh, what the hell am I doing? Maybe I should just go back to work. But if you believe in yourself and you surround yourself with the right people, keep going. That's my advice.
Yeah, I like that one. Keep going. So next question. What app would you recommend to other entrepreneurs or employees even as well that will help them boost their productivity?
It's a good question. So when I first started trying to organize my schedule, I came from an IT background, so I love the whole idea of agile and Kanban and things like that. So I've still got the Trello app on my phone. It's just a nice, quick, simple way of adding things to your to-do list, and then you visually can see the progress by moving your progress onto different buckets. So I think that's got to be a must-have app for people who are working, because you've got so many plates to spin.
Yep, I agree. I use Trello myself. In fact, I use it to manage this podcast. But you also mentioned earlier on Podio, which is another app that I use and I'm a big fan of. I think Podio helps me anyway to manage, as you mentioned, engagement with people, engagement with deals that I'm looking at, and just to track their flow. So yeah, two great ones you've given.
Definitely.
Final question. What does financial freedom mean to you?
For me, financial freedom really isn't about the money, to be honest, because if it was about the money, I probably would have stayed in a high-paid investment banking role. It's more about the time, the value that I can spend with family later on. It's more about later in life when my development business, grows to a certain level where I want to move more into sort of philanthropic type businesses where I can actually, almost be like a dragon and work with other businesses and help them grow. Because for me, being an entrepreneur, really, it doesn't feel like work, if I'm being honest. It's actually quite good fun. And therefore, I don't actually think about how much time gets consumed in it, because, you've got 24 hours in the day. So I think it's family and the amount of time and the quality time you can spend with them, and also later on down the track, how I can help and be philanthropic and have fun and help other businesses grow.
Very good, very good. I think for me, and as part of the Slow Money Club, what we always say is that financial freedom is about time. It's not about money. And so I'm glad that you echoed that sentiment. It's really about not having to exchange time for money, being free to choose how you spend your time. And it's not about being rich or having a yacht or things like that. It's just about having that choice as to what you do with your time. So
choice is the key word,
Oh, great. Before we let you go, anything else that you want to say? Anything else? Any piece of advice, parting wisdom that you want to leave us with?
What I would say is you've got people like Kwesi here. There's people like me. Reach out to people who've got lots of experience, because there are a lot of people in the entrepreneurial world who are very helpful, very knowledgeable, always happy to share. And that's a fantastic way of learning from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, again, I echo that. As I said in the beginning, we met randomly at a networking event. It was just sheer coincidence that you lived near me. But, in that time, you've been very open. You've been able to share everything that you know and everything you're doing with me openly. And I've tried to do likewise. So I think there's lots of other entrepreneurs like that, and other solo entrepreneurs out there shouldn't be afraid to reach out to people like yourself.
Yeah, and that's how you learn. That's how I'm learning. We're all learning like that, right?
Yep. Okay, so thank you. We will link to everything we've spoken about, the resources, the tools, etc. in the show notes. Of course, we'll also link to Diksesh, his profile, the things he's working on, as well as his contact details, so that anybody listening can reach out to him and pick his brain like I like to. But Diksesh, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me on this, and thank you for sharing your journey with us, really, because I'm sure everybody learned something, whether experienced employee or whether a new entrepreneur. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like more information on what you just heard, go to slowmoneyclub.com and join the club. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever app you use. And please also give us a 5-star review. That way, you get the latest episode on your phone as soon as it's released. You also help other people discover this podcast too. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the Slow Money Club.